Hey there, where are you watching from? Drop your city in the comments.
They say you always remember the moment you realize you were never really part of your own family story. Not a character, not even a footnote, just a ghost standing in the corner of 100 photo albums, always behind the camera, never in front of it. For me, that moment wasn't some big blow-up or dramatic discovery. It was more like a slow drip, a quiet, seeping realization that finally filled the room and drowned whatever was left of my patience. It was birthday number 43, and once again, the calendar flipped. The sun came up, and the only person who remembered was the app notification from my bank offering me 5% cash back if I treated myself to something special. Cute. The Morgan family, however, not a word, not a text, not even a whoops, we were busy. You'd think by now I'd be used to it. I mean, it's been like this since I was a kid. Tyler, my younger brother by 6 years, was always the star, the favorite, the one with the dimples and the football trophies, and the charm that made every adult in the room fall all over themselves trying to give him something. His birthdays were these massive, coordinated productions. I'm talking themes, rented bounce houses, whole catering spreads, and every neighbor in a 5-mile radius being invited like it was some damn community festival. Meanwhile, my birthdays? If I was lucky, I got a cake. Usually from a grocery store, more often just a pat on the back and a vague promise to do something nice later, which somehow never came. And yeah, I know, some people have it worse. Some people don't even get a family. But when you're raised in the same house, under the same roof, breathing the same air, and still made to feel like your background noise to someone else's show, it eats at you. It makes you question if you were born wrong, if you somehow missed your chance to matter. I remember once when I was 16, I asked Mom why we never really celebrated my birthday, the way we did Tyler's, and she blinked at me like I just asked why the sky was blue. You've always been so independent, Kara. You never really needed all that attention. As if not begging for affection meant I didn't want any. As if being quiet meant I liked being invisible. But this year, something cracked. Maybe it was the timing. Maybe it was how obvious it had all become. 3 days after my birthday passed without a whisper, Tyler turned 37 and my parents threw him a backyard bash with string lights, a private bartender, and a literal mariachi band. The entire neighborhood was there. I saw the pictures on Facebook, dozens of them. My mom had uploaded an entire album with the title, Our Amazing Son Turns 37. There were 27 photos of Tyler holding different cocktails and smiling in different poses with different people. I wasn't in any of them. Of course I wasn't. I wasn't invited. And before you ask, no, I didn't confront anyone. Not this time. Not after years of hearing the same excuses, the same fake shock, the same gaslighting that made me feel like I was just being dramatic. I used to try, used to remind them a few days before, hint around, say things like, oh, I might take the day off next week, got some plans, hoping someone would connect the dots, but they never did. Or if they did, they pretended not to. Either way, the outcome was the same. This time, though, I didn't cry. I didn't text my mom. I didn't call my brother. I didn't sit in bed with ice cream watching old sitcoms trying to convince myself I didn't care. No, this year I smiled. I let the silence wash over me like a wave I had finally learned how to float on instead of drowning in. Because the truth was, I had a secret. A big one. A few months back, after spending nearly a decade breaking my back at a corporate job where I managed logistics for a team of 20 and pulled off a nightmare of a merger that no one thought would happen smoothly, I got a bonus, not a regular one, a life-changing one, 6 figures, out of nowhere. Quietly deposited into my account with a short email from the VP. We couldn't have done this without you. I didn't tell anyone, not even my closest friend at work, not my parents, not my brother, definitely not social media. I just sat there staring at the number on the screen like it had been dropped from the sky, like someone finally saw what I did and handed me proof that I wasn't invisible. And in that moment, something inside me shifted. I realized I didn't need their parties, their attention, their last-minute apologies. I had something better now. I had a choice. I could keep chasing a seat at a table that never had a chair for me, or I could build my own damn table somewhere they'd never think to look. And so I started planning, quietly and carefully. I wanted it to be perfect. I wanted the moment to land with the kind of quiet finality that couldn't be argued with. But most of all, I wanted them to feel it. Not with yelling or tears, but with the kind of cold, echoing silence that only comes when someone stops giving a damn. So I made a decision. No warnings, no hints, no begging, just one move, one post, and when it landed, it would land like a bomb. But before I go any further, let me ask you this. Have you ever been so done, so bone-deep exhausted with people who claim to love you but treat you like an afterthought that the idea of revenge feels less like anger and more like self-respect? Would you have done what I did? Or would you have stayed quiet, hoping for next year? Because next year was off the table. And this year I was going to disappear, not in sadness, but in power. And when I came back, they wouldn't recognize the version of me they'd so easily forgotten. There's a peculiar kind of clarity that washes over you once you realize you've been handing people weapons your whole life and watching them use them against you without ever daring to take them back. That's what the bonus felt like. Not just money, not just a reward for grueling work or the long hours I spent fixing other people's mistakes while being politely left out of the credit, but a sword I didn't even know I'd earned. Handed to me in silence, free of expectation, judgment, or obligation. $125,000, clean, untied, mine, and I never breathed a word about it. That morning, 2 weeks before my birthday, I'd been dragging myself into the office on barely 4 hours of sleep, clutching a travel mug of burnt coffee and trying to pretend I wasn't already fantasizing about retirement. When the email landed in my inbox with the kind of sterile subject line that gives nothing away, performance compensation review, please read. I assumed it was standard, a formality, maybe a few $1,000s at most, the kind of thing they throw at you to keep you from quitting after 12 years of loyalty, and 0 raises that actually matched inflation. But when I clicked on it, saw the number, and reread the message 5 times just to make sure I hadn't hallucinated the extra 0, something inside me cracked. Not from excitement, but from the sudden nauseating realization that no one in my life would ever think I was worth that kind of acknowledgement. Not my family, not the people who were supposed to be proud of me just for surviving, not the ones who remembered Tyler's high school football win like it was the moon landing, but couldn't tell you what I did for a living if their lives depended on it. That was the moment it clicked. I wasn't just forgotten, I was dismissed. My accomplishments weren't overlooked by accident. They were ignored by design, because they didn't fit the narrative. Kara, the reliable one. Kara, who didn't need help. Kara, who never caused drama. They liked me that way, background noise to Tyler's spotlight. And I had let them do it, for years, like some desperate stagehand, who thought that if I swept the floors well enough, someone might finally hand me a script. But no one ever did, so I stayed quiet. I didn't forward the email. I didn't screenshot it. I didn't even tell Monica, who worked the same hellish merger with me and who absolutely deserved a slice of that bonus herself. I just smiled, closed the laptop, and walked to the break room like I wasn't carrying a secret powerful enough to reshape my entire life. That night, I went home, ordered Thai food, poured myself a glass of wine, and started looking at real estate listings like I was browsing shoes. Not because I knew what I wanted yet, but because the possibility felt intoxicating. I wasn't looking to impress anyone. I didn't need a big house, a flash of wealth, or some trophy property to show off. I just wanted a place that was mine, untouched by family expectations, or awkward visits, or the passive-aggressive way my mom rearranged everything every time she stopped by. And then, like fate was feeling generous, my birthday rolled around. 43, not a single call, not a single text. No happy birthday from my parents, No card in the mail, no hastily written post on Facebook pretending they'd remembered. Nothing. Just a Tuesday. Just silence. And I sat with it, not with anger, not with tears, but with a strange, serene sense of finality. Because if they couldn't even fake it this year, then it was clear they weren't going to change. They were never going to see me unless I made them look. Not by yelling, not by begging, but by stepping so far out of their narrative that they couldn't ignore the empty space I left behind. 3 days later, Tyler had his birthday party, the annual spectacle I'd learned to brace for. This time, it was even more absurd than usual. A full-blown backyard fiesta. Tents, a mobile bar, a taco truck, live music, and at least 50 people smiling like they were extras in a commercial for upper-middle-class perfection. I wasn't invited, again. I watched it unfold on social media like I was scrolling through the life of a stranger, except I recognized every face. My mom posted 3 different albums, one titled My Handsome Boy, another called Family Moments, and the third one, because apparently she still had the energy, so much love. Not a single photo of me, no mention, not even a comment like, "Wish Kara could be here." It was like I didn't exist, and for the first time, I felt nothing. Not jealousy, not grief, just space. Space to breathe. Space to decide. Space to plan, because while they were busy clinking glasses and dancing on the patio, I was wiring a down payment on a lakeside property in a town they'd never heard of. To a realtor who didn't care what my brother did for a living, didn't know I was the family ghost, and didn't treat me like an afterthought. Her name was Kelly. She had a short, no-bullshit haircut and talked to me like I was the only client that mattered. She showed me a cabin, nothing extravagant but honest, old wood floors, 2 porches, a fireplace, and a view that hit you in the chest like a lullaby. I didn't even think twice. I said yes. I wired the money, and then I waited. I waited for them to notice I wasn't at the party, waited for a call, a message, anything. And what did I get? Radio silence, again. My absence was as invisible as my presence. And that's when I realized the real power of being forgotten. It meant you could move without explanation. You could vanish without a trace, and no one would come looking. It's terrifying, sure, but it's also freedom. So I packed a bag, told no one, turned off location sharing, and got on a plane. I wasn't running away. I was reclaiming the parts of me that they had trained me to ignore, and I had no plans of telling them, not yet. Because the best part of revenge isn't making noise. It's letting the silence do the talking. There's something almost sinful about walking into a place where nobody knows your name, your face, or your story, and realizing that you owe no one an explanation, no defense, no backstory, no neatly packaged version of your trauma dressed up in polite laughter and downplayed disappointment. Just the raw, undiluted fact that you are there because you chose to be, not because someone asked you to show up. That was exactly what it felt like when I stepped out of the taxi onto the gravel drive of the cabin in Bridgeton, Maine. A quiet, timber-framed haven that sat nestled between pine trees so tall they seemed to hold up the sky itself, and a lake so still it felt like a secret that nature kept for itself. The air smelled like pine needles and cold water, and for the first time in years, I took a deep breath and felt it go all the way down to the bottom of my lungs, without catching on bitterness or self-doubt. The cabin wasn't extravagant, not in the way Instagram sells extravagance with polished marble countertops and infinity pools and decor that looks like it was staged by someone who's never lived in a house longer than a weekend. No, this place had a soul, and not the kind that comes from architecture magazines or Pinterest boards. It had creaky floors that didn't apologize for their age, windows that let in just enough light to feel alive without overwhelming you, and a kitchen with cabinets painted the kind of soft blue that reminded me of the sky just before sunrise. It was, in every possible way, the exact opposite of the house I grew up in, where everything was beige and spotless and cold, where laughter only happened around Tyler, and silence was something you earned by not being a burden. I paid in cash, all of it. No mortgage, no financing, No cosigners, no questions. Kelly, the realtor, raised an eyebrow when I slid the proof of funds across the table and said, "All cash, no contingencies." She asked gently, what brought me out there alone? What made me pick Bridgeton of all places? I told her I needed a change. That was all. She didn't push. She just smiled, handed me the keys, and said, "Whatever brought you here, you've got a fresh start now." And for once, I believed it wasn't just a throwaway line. For the next 7 days, I didn't check email. I didn't respond to messages. Not that there were many to ignore. I didn't even get the usual, "How's your week?" from my mother. Not even a bored emoji from Tyler. Nothing but the loud, clear absence of interest that had defined most of my adult life. And instead of hurting, it felt like liberation. Every time I sat on the porch with a cup of coffee and watched the fog roll across the water, I felt something inside me unclench, like I was slowly peeling off years of emotional armor that had never protected me anyway. I spent hours walking through the woods, alone with my thoughts, listening to birds I didn't recognize, letting the wind tangle my hair into a mess no one was there to critique. I cooked real meals, not the frozen Trader Joe's dinners I usually nuked in a hurry after 12-hour shifts, but actual food, just for me, just because I deserved something warm and made with care. And I took photos. Not for social media, not to prove anything, but because I wanted to capture what peace looked like. I took pictures of the lake at dawn, the way the mist curled over the surface like breath. I snapped the shadows of trees on the hardwood floor, the reflection of my wine glass on the window as the sun went down, the messy corner of the porch where I piled up books I hadn't had time to read in years. It was quiet, and it was beautiful, and no one knew I was there. And I didn't feel lonely. I felt invisible on my own terms. But on the 7th day, something shifted. I was sitting on the porch, barefoot, wearing a hoodie I'd had since college, and sipping black coffee that had gone cold. And I looked through the photos on my phone, dozens of them, and I realized I didn't want to hide anymore, not because I needed their validation, but because I wanted them to know I didn't need it, that I had gone out and found joy on my own, that while they were busy celebrating the golden child, I had been out in the world building something real, something that couldn't be ignored or explained away as a phase or a fluke. And in that moment, I understood that my silence had been the setup, but the reveal needed to be louder than anything I'd ever said to them before. So I opened Instagram, scrolled past the wedding photos, the baby announcements, the fake happy selfies from people I hadn't seen since college, and posted a single image: the view from my porch, the lake stretching out into the trees, the light catching the surface just enough to make it glow. No caption, no tags, just the image. Within 20 minutes, the likes started rolling in. Then the comments. Old coworkers, people I hadn't spoken to in years, all saying things like, "Wow, where is this?" or "This looks like a dream." But I ignored all of them. I was waiting for one comment in particular. The one that would break the silence I hadn't asked for, but had grown to understand all too well. An hour later, it came. From Tyler. 3 words. "Where are you?" I stared at that comment for a long time. Not because it mattered, but because it didn't. Because finally, for the first time in my life, I was the one who had vanished. And they were the ones left wondering. And let me tell you, there's a kind of power in making them ask the questions they never cared enough to consider before. A power that tastes a little like revenge, but mostly like freedom. And I wasn't done yet, not even close. The strange thing about silence is that people rarely notice it until it's weaponized, until the absence of sound, of presence, of participation becomes so deliberate, so pointed, that it starts to ring louder than any scream. For years, I'd been silent by default, pushed into the background like the extra no one cast, but who stood there anyway, hoping the director might glance over and change his mind. But this time, my silence wasn't rooted in sadness or disappointment or even exhaustion. It was strategic. It was surgical. It was mine. And judging by the way the comments began flooding under that one serene photo, my family was finally hearing it. The first one was from a high school friend I hadn't seen in more than 20 years. "This place looks magical, Kara. Where is it?" A harmless, friendly question that might have passed unnoticed if it hadn't been followed within minutes by others that bore more tension, more curiosity, dressed up in politeness. "Wait, did you move? Why haven't we seen this before? This looks like a whole vacation property?" The tone was confused, but not yet suspicious. Then came Tyler. I could almost picture his face as he typed it. Eyebrows furrowed, jaw set, that patented Morgan boy expression that landed somewhere between entitled disbelief and mild condescension. "Where are you?" Just 3 words, as if he had the right to ask after an entire lifetime of never bothering. But the real knife came a few minutes later when Mom chimed in with, "Didn't know you were traveling, sweetie. Thought you had work." Sweetie, a word she only ever used when she was trying to cover her tracks, trying to fold her guilt into a soft-sounding package and hope I'd take it without opening it. And then, as if they had coordinated it, the wave broke. Dad, who rarely commented on anything unless it was a political meme or one of Tyler's latest achievements, popped up with, "This would have been great to see on your birthday, Kara. A shame you didn't share it with the family." The implication landed sharp, passive-aggressive, wrapped in concern, the suggestion that I was the one withholding, I was the one creating distance, I was responsible for the lack of connection, like their 2 decades of neglect and erasure had never happened. The irony would have been laughable if it hadn't been so familiar. Still, I didn't respond. I let the comments pile up, one after the other, like dust on furniture no one's touched in years. Some were veiled digs. "Didn't know you were into nature now. Guess you needed a break from your busy job." While others were more direct, like Tyler's next jab. "Kinda weird flex to ghost your family and then post some Zen retreat like nothing's wrong. You could have just said you were upset." I read that one twice, slowly, letting each word settle, not because it hurt. God, no, I was long past giving him that kind of power. But because it was exactly what I had expected, and yet still managed to piss me off with its smug, self-centered distortion of the truth. In his mind, I had disappeared to make a point. Not because I was tired, not because I was done being an afterthought, but because I wanted to punish them. As if he couldn't fathom the idea that maybe I wasn't thinking about him at all when I signed those papers, packed my bag and left. And that's when I finally broke my silence. Not to argue, not to explain, but to clarify. In the way only truth can. I commented back, once, and only once, beneath Tyler's last message. "You never asked." 3 words, simple, honest, final, and the effect was immediate. The thread went quiet, like a room where someone just slapped someone else and everyone's waiting to see what happens next. No one replied, no one called, but I could feel it. The weight of their realization, or maybe just their confusion. Hanging in the air, finally recognizing the absence I had so carefully carved. Later that night, I checked my messages, not because I was hoping for reconciliation, but because I wanted to see how far they'd spiral now that I had upended their carefully curated narrative. Sure enough, Mom had sent a long, rambling paragraph about how family should stick together, and how she had no idea I was feeling so isolated, which would have been touching if it hadn't come attached to a screenshot of Tyler's party, with the message, "We wished you were there," as if that post somehow proved they remembered me. Dad wrote, "We're worried. You could have just said something." As if I hadn't, for years, tried to say something in all the ways they refused to hear. But then, buried among the mess of guilt-wrapped accusations and passive commentary, was a message I didn't expect. Aunt Patty, the family wild card, always too blunt, too honest, the one who drank too much at Christmas and told uncomfortable truths that everyone tried to forget by New Year's. Her message was just 4 words. "Finally, girl, finally." I stared at that message longer than any of the others, feeling a tight knot in my chest loosen just a bit. She saw me, she always had in her own chaotic way, and it took exactly 1 sentence for her to say what none of the others could, that maybe, just maybe, this wasn't a tantrum or a cry for attention or a breakdown. Maybe it was a breakthrough, and maybe she had been waiting for me to have it all along. That night, I sat on the floor of my new living room with the windows open and the fire crackling, watching the wind move through the trees like it was brushing the world clean. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I didn't feel the urge to justify, to defend, to make myself smaller so other people could stay comfortable. I didn't care that they were angry. I didn't care that they were confused, because their outrage meant they finally noticed I was gone. And the fact that it shocked them said everything I'd ever needed to know about how little they'd seen me before. But it wasn't about them anymore. Not really. The silence had served its purpose. The reveal had landed. And now all that remained was what I chose to do next. With my time, my peace, and the freedom I had finally stopped asking for permission to claim. There's a peculiar shift that occurs when you finally stop trying to earn something that was never going to be given to you in the first place. Whether it's respect, affection, acknowledgement, or the bare minimum of being seen by people who should have noticed you without being prompted. It doesn't feel like revenge at first, not in the fiery, dramatic way the word usually implies, but more like a slow exhale after holding your breath for far too long. A quiet surrender to the truth that you've been screaming in silence your whole life and no one ever really heard it. That was where I found myself, in the days that followed the fallout from the photo, after the comments had dried up, after the initial flurry of passive-aggressive messages turned into an awkward, lingering nothingness that filled the digital space between us with more honesty than any words ever could. And the strangest part was how peaceful it all felt. I didn't go back. Not to my apartment in the city, not to the routine of checking my phone every hour, wondering if maybe, just maybe, someone remembered to care. I stayed at the cabin. I bought groceries from the little market 2 miles down the road, where no one knew who I was, no one knew who Tyler was, and no one asked me why I looked like I was on the verge of either crying or laughing every time I stared out over the lake and felt the stillness press against my skin like a benediction. I repainted the guest room. I fixed the squeaky step on the back porch. I cooked for myself and actually sat down to eat instead of hovering over the sink like I didn't deserve a table. Every choice, no matter how small, became an act of reclaiming something I didn't know I'd lost, or maybe had never been given the chance to have. And then, on the 6th day after the post, as the morning fog still clung to the tops of the trees like nature itself hadn't quite woken up yet, he showed up. I heard the tires on the gravel before I saw him. The low crunching sound that didn't belong in the pattern of birdsong and wind I'd gotten used to. For a second I thought maybe it was Kelly, or someone from the town coming to check on the new stranger in their midst. But when I stepped out onto the porch, hair unbrushed, sweatshirt stained with paint, coffee mug in hand, I saw the silver SUV and the man leaning against it like he'd rehearsed the pose. Tyler. He looked out of place, like a magazine model dropped into a documentary. Too polished, too perfectly dressed, the city still clinging to him in every wrinkle-free sleeve and carefully gelled hair. For a moment, neither of us said anything. He didn't wave. I didn't smile. We just stood there staring across the space between us. Two people raised in the same house, but shaped by entirely different versions of the truth. I figured you wouldn't answer if I called, he said finally, voice casual, like this was just a drop-in visit, like I hadn't detonated a bomb in our family's narrative and walked away from the flames without blinking. I wouldn't have, I replied, setting the mug down on the railing, watching the steam swirl upward like it might carry my irritation with it. So what do you want? He looked thrown off, like he hadn't expected me to be so direct, which was laughable considering he'd spent a lifetime bulldozing through conversations without ever checking for bruises. Look, this whole, whatever this is, it's kind of extreme, don't you think? I let the question hang there for a moment, not because I needed time to think, but because I wanted him to sit in it, to hear how absurd it sounded when it wasn't being cushioned by our mother's excuses or our father's silence. What's extreme, Tyler? Buying a house with my own money? Not showing up to a party I wasn't invited to? Or finally doing something without asking for permission? He opened his mouth, then closed it again. That was a first. You didn't tell anyone, he said after a pause, trying a different angle, Something softer, but still just as entitled. It just felt like you were trying to make a statement. I stepped off the porch and walked past him toward the lake, not caring if he followed. He did. Of course he did. He always needed to be wherever the attention shifted. Tyler, I said without turning around, you've had 37 birthdays, and I can count the number of times you asked me how I was doing on one hand. You and Mom and Dad forgot mine again this year. Not a card, not a text, nothing. And I didn't throw a fit. I didn't even bring it up. I just left. He was quiet, and I could hear his shoes crunching the damp earth behind me. We didn't mean to forget. I laughed then, not because it was funny, but because it was so familiar, so painfully predictable. That's the point, Tyler. You never mean to, but it still happens, every year, and I finally realized that the only person who cared about that was me, so I stopped caring. He didn't respond, not right away. We stood at the edge of the water, the breeze tugging at our clothes, the lake as still as a held breath. "So is this it?" he asked eventually. "You just cut us off?" I turned to face him then, not angry, not triumphant, just tired of having to explain to someone who only ever listened when the conversation was about him. I didn't do this to punish you. I did it because I was tired of being the one who always showed up, who always stayed silent, who always made room for everyone else. I stopped chasing you, that's all. He nodded, a small movement, like maybe a part of him finally saw what I'd been trying to say for years. In the things I never said. But I didn't wait for more. I turned back toward the cabin, letting the conversation end there, not because I didn't have more to say, but because I didn't need to say it anymore. He didn't follow me this time. Inside, I poured another cup of coffee and sat down on the porch, watching him drive away through the trees, his SUV shrinking until it was just a glint of metal between the trunks. And for a moment, I didn't feel angry or victorious. I just felt still, like I'd finally arrived at the center of something I'd been circling my whole life. I don't know if they'll ever get it. I don't know if my mother will ever stop sending guilt-wrapped texts, or if my father will ever admit that he saw what was happening and chose to ignore it because it was easier than confronting the imbalance. I don't know if Tyler will ever see me as more than the sister who didn't clap loud enough from the sidelines. But I do know this. Somewhere between the silence and the lake and the unspoken things that never made it into birthday cards, I found something that feels a hell of a lot like peace. And if they want to find me, they'll have to come looking in places they never bothered to go before.